this over and over and over again on this show, but when you watch this game, it's just going to be a further reminder to myself and hopefully to you that the Rose Bowl should be hosting the national championship game every single year. And I say it over and over again, the history of it, the prestige of it, and just the absolute all. And for anyone who appreciates the history of college football, just if you get anything out of this segment, just keep that in the back of your mind. But nevertheless, back to the game. So we have Alabama versus Indiana, and this is actually going to be the third time that Alabama has been in the Rose Bowl in the past 5 years. Back in 2021, they played Notre Dame, and then 2024, when they were facing Michigan, and now they face an Indiana team that has been really consistent all year. They're so balanced both offensively and defensively, and Kirk Cignetti deserves a huge shout out for achieving what's essentially been the best 2 year turnaround that we've ever seen in the history of college football. And for them to be able to beat Ohio State as well, I don't care if they scored 13 points. I wouldn't have cared if they scored 7 points. At the end of the day, a win's a win, and they took care of business. And I know some people, people who were, you know, bandwagoning Diego Pavia are going to say, well, Fernando Mendoza's stats didn't light up the stat sheet. But at the end of the day, he was the best player in the country. I think I wholeheartedly believe that. And I'm really glad that he got the award because, he did prove that he is the best player in the country. I think he's only going to continue that as we kind of move along here. And the problem that Alabama is going to have is I don't even necessarily think it's a Ty Simpson problem, right? I think Ty Simpson has showed a lot of different characteristics this year, particularly in the latter half of the year, right? I think he showed toughness. I think he showed poise. And I think he's shown a lot of composure, particularly when he's been inside the pocket. And I think I think he's super underrated athletically. And I also think he's someone that can push the football down the field when absolutely necessary. And for a guy that has essentially had little to no rushing attack surrounding him, I think he deserves a lot more credit for the position that Alabama's in compared to what other people will typically tell you. So I think just before we get into that, I just think Ty Simpson deserves a lot of credit for that. And, he does have some great weapons surrounding him. I mean, you have the Jeremy Bernards of the world, you have the Ryan Williams of the world. So you have all of that ready to go, right? But I can't stress enough, if you're Alabama, you have to find a way to get Jan Miller going. It just drives me up a wall that no matter what's going on, Ryan Grubb just cannot get that figured out. And I think that's only going to continue to haunt them if they don't figure that out. Because the reality is right now is that Alabama is too much of a one-dimensional team to be able to beat Indiana right now. And I hate to say that too, because I've criticized Kalen DeBoer, I'll admit, a little bit too much on this show. But the one thing that they do have on their side is that Kalen DeBoer is a guy that wins in big time moments and big time games. And if you see his track record facing top 10 opponents, there's a reason why he's been that successful, right? But we know that Alabama's bread and butter really is their defense, right? And I'm surprised that Kane Walmack didn't get enough calls to be a head coach, because I do think he's a guy that can definitely do it. I think he has all the tools to be able to do that. So I'm kind of surprised that nobody really gave him a call or anything. But Alabama's defense is going to have to come up big if they have any chance of winning this game. I mean, particularly the pass defense has been absolutely sensational, right? If you look down at the ticker, 9.2% on completions of 20 yards or more. So they've done a really good job at being able to eliminate as many explosive plays as possible. And granted, could they be better a little bit at getting to the quarterback? Sure. I think there's a couple criticisms there. But what I will say is that they do a relatively good job at tackling. They really don't give up a lot of yards after catch. And for the most part, this front seven and particularly the secondary have been absolutely outstanding out to this point. And Alabama's going to have to get Mendoza just out of his rhythm. And I think they're just really going to have to get that early early play where, maybe it's an early interception or maybe it's a fumble. They're going to have to get some type of play like that to really get the ball rolling. Because to me, if I'm Alabama, I think you want nothing more than Indiana to start out with the ball, make them go 3-and-out, and then Ty Simpson gets an explosive 20 or 30-yard play, and then be able to grind, and be able to get a touchdown. So you're going to have to find a balance between that. But like I said before, Alabama, I mean, their strength is really them on defense. And the other thing I'll mention too, real quick, is Alabama cannot afford to have another what I'll call a comeback, so to speak. They're not be able to get away with being down 17 versus Indiana. It's not going to work like it did versus Oklahoma. And I said on the show that I thought Oklahoma was gonna beat Alabama. I'm not going to say handedly, but I thought they would win by at least a touchdown. But I was wrong about that. And I guess I was wrong about the resiliency of Alabama up to this point. But I am not going to count them out entirely, even though I do think ultimately the reason why Indiana is going to win this game is just because, quite frankly, they're just a more complete team on both sides of the ball. And it's hard to discredit Indiana when they've won the Big Ten title. They have that signature win versus Ohio State, and they've totally looked like a legitimate national contender. And I think if you maybe look at this Indiana team, maybe at week 7 or 8, I think maybe you can kind of sit there and say, you know what? Do they have the makings of being a national title contender? Absolutely. But did we see enough of that yet to totally conclude that? Not necessarily. And I think that's kind of worth mentioning too. But let's turn our attention a little bit to Indiana, right? Indiana offensively is one of the most complete teams in the entire country, and having an outstanding 82.1% completion percentage on third down. I mean, that's just pretty much just lights out on third down. And there's a reason why they've been able to extend drives, get points in the red zone, and quite frankly, just playing relatively mistake-free football. And another stat for those of you to keep out there is Mendoza has not had a single game this season where he's thrown for multiple interceptions. And if you ask me, that's really the stat line of this game that we all need to be on the lookout for. Can Mendoza keep that up of not throwing multiple interceptions in this game? And the other question I'm going to ask for everybody too is how quickly can Alabama get to a fast start? And who's going to control the tempo of this game? And most importantly, who's going to win the battle on third down? Those are really the big kind of questions that I ask myself too, because I think Indiana is a very physical team. They're an athletic team. They're a team that keeps everything in front of them. And most importantly, what Indiana is more than anything else is just a very disciplined, well-coached team. And that's something that you really just cannot overlook, especially in this day and age of college football where you constantly see transfers over and over and you're constantly seeing turnover. That's just one thing that you just cannot overlook. In this day and age, you have to pretty much fit in 8 months what you used to be able to in 4 years. So for Cignetti and Shanahan and this entire staff to be able to do that quickly, that's quite the testament there, and definitely a big shout out to them. But Heisman Trophy winner Fernando Mendoza has been absolutely sensational, highly efficient, completing 71% of his passes, just shy of 3,000 yards and averaging almost 10 yards a completion, which is definitely an underrated stat that I think a lot of us tend to overlook. And I think Surratt is going to be a guy that he's going to be targeted multiple times versus Alabama. So I think you definitely have to have a plan to be able to contain him as much as you can. And two, another thing I'll mention real quick about Indiana defensively is they're first in the country in preventing 20 yards or more in terms of completions, and also 7th in the country in terms of being able to get sacks from the drop back. And this is all really just to say that what Indiana can also do defensively that I don't think Alabama can necessarily do defensively is Indiana can still get pressure on you, only bring in three or four guys. They've consistently been able to do that throughout the season. They're able to do it versus Oregon. They were able to do it versus Penn State for the most part, and they did it versus Ohio State too. There's a lot of examples where they've done that throughout the year, and they're going to have to continue to do that versus Alabama. I think for the most part, Alabama's offensive line held up relatively well versus Oklahoma, but I think that's going to be a battle that you're going to have to keep your eyes on if you're an Alabama fan. It's going to be how relaxed is Ty Simpson? How quick of a start can they get to? Can they actually get this rushing attack going? And most importantly, I think it's going to be who makes less mistakes, who controls third down, and it's just going to be one of those games where both these teams deserve the right to be there. Both those teams have been absolutely fun to watch this year. And I think this is going to be a Rose Bowl that we're going to be talking about for a long time. But I think you have to give Indiana the slight edge in this matchup, although I do think it's going to be closer than people think, because